Legendary college basketball coach Bobby Knight has died. The Hall of Famer got his start at Army in 1965, but he's best known for his 29 seasons at Indiana University, where he led that school to 3 national championships. The first of those came in 1976 when Indiana went undefeated, a feat no team has accomplished since. He would go on to coach at Texas Tech for 7 seasons before retiring in 2008. Knight was the Big Ten Coach of the Year 5 times and a 4-time National Coach of the Year. He's also one of only 3 coaches to have won an NCAA title, an NIT title, and an Olympic gold medal. Bob Knight was 83 years old. Let's bring in college basketball analyst for ESPN and ESPN Insider, Jay Bilas, and longtime sports columnist and New York Times bestselling author Mike Lupica. Guys, thanks so much for being on this morning to talk about this. Jay, I'll start with you. You were playing at Duke in the peak years of Bob Knight at Indiana. He won a national championship, I think, right around your junior or senior year with Keith Smart and Steve Alford and those guys. And then you got to work alongside him at ESPN. So what are your reflections this morning on Coach Knight?
Well, Willie, Bob Knight was an American original. And while he was not for everyone, he was a friend of mine. And we spent a lot of time together, not only when we worked together, we played a lot of golf, went overseas several times. And you know, he was one of the greatest coaches ever. When you would sit and watch practice, he got in and out of situations and dissected the game like no other coach I've ever been around. His ability, I think he could have coached anything, any sport, and been great at it. That's how proficient he was in breaking things down. He had, but when I said he's not for everyone, at his best, there was nobody better. But when he wasn't at his best, I could always understand people that didn't care for him. And I never argued with those people. He was unique, and I've never met anyone like him. But you know, one of the true greats that have ever walked the sideline. And he was smart. He was engaging. At times, he was uncommonly stubborn and thoughtless, but a very emotional person. And I think that's one of the things that did cause him some problems. You know, when he was let go at Indiana, when he was fired in 2000, I don't think it was anger that he had at Indiana. I think it was emotional hurt that manifested itself and looked like anger to others, if that makes sense. But just an extraordinary coach.
Hey, Mike Lupica. So for people who maybe in more recent years knew Bobby Knight as the guy that threw the chair across the floor, and knew him for the outburst that they would see, and that's all they knew of Bobby Knight. Can you talk about follow up on what Jay said? And there we go. That's the moment a lot of people remember. Talk about the Bobby Knight that we don't see in videos on YouTube, or that you can't show in 3 seconds here, about what he did for kids, what he did for high school students going into college, how he shaped them into champions, and how he did it year after year after year after year, and how even in 1976 he did something that nobody has done since.
Joe, he would have done it the year before if Scott May hadn't gotten hurt. They would have gone 2 years without losing a game. Jay wrote a wonderful column last night on at ESPN.com. And what he said in the middle of it was he finally gave up trying to explain to people why he was Bob's friend. I knew him for over 40 years. We had a roller coaster relationship because a lot of people in my world did. His best friend was a sports writer, Bob Hamill from Bloomington. We shared a love of the Chip Hilton sports books because the great coach Claire B., who wrote them, had been one of Bob Knight's mentors. The thing that was so complicated about him and made it so hard to defend a guy who I believe is as great a basketball coach as ever lived was a larger-than-life figure who would sometimes sabotage himself by being smaller than life. And that's what he did constantly. But at his best, you talk to his ex-players, and Jay knows this far better than I do. They are intensely loyal to him. I spoke to Mike Woodson the current Indiana coach last night, who was extremely emotional. And he said, I can't speak to what other people think of Coach. All I can talk about is what he meant to me, and what he meant to me is everything. And Jay knows this in the world in which he lives, which is college basketball. Knight did the winning he did, Joe, without cheating and graduating his players at a time when that really meant something in college sports.
So here's Bob Knight in 1991 during his induction into the Basketball Hall of Fame.
I've never felt comfortable with the award Coach of the Year or Coach of anything. I think there's a much more appropriate nomenclature that could be used, and that would be Team of the Year. Because for a team to develop to a point where a coach is recognized for what that team has done is an indication that the players, the assistant coaches, everyone involved has really put forth an outstanding effort, and that is truly a team honor.
Jay, I'm not sure people outside the basketball world fully understand the legacy he's left because of your coach, Coach K, Mike Krzyzewski at Duke, having played under Bob Knight at West Point. How significant a figure was Bob Knight in Coach K's life?
Oh, profound. Willie, I think everyone can agree that the relationship that you have with the coach is similar to a parent. You seek the approval. Any praise you get from your coach lifts you up. Any criticism, kind of weighs you down. And Coach K had a profound love for Coach Knight. And when I was playing at Duke in the Final Four in 1986, we were playing in the championship game, and he brought Coach Knight in to talk to the team. And when Knight walked into a room, I mean, he was 6'4" and a big man, but his personality filled up the entire stadium when he spoke to us. And I still remember what he said. He said, remember one thing, boys, nobody remembers who finished second. And of course, we lost by a bucket and finished second. He was right. But he was a commanding presence. And any room he was in, I remember doing a thing with him and Bill Parcells, who he knew at Army when Parcells was an assistant to Red Blake at Army. And at the time, Parcells was head coach of the Dallas Cowboys. And I was hosting an event with those two, kind of a discussion with them, an evening with them. And I was in a room with Parcells with a kind of a VIP thing. And Parcells he filled up the whole room. And then Bob Knight came in. And Knight filled up the room, and Parcells kind of shrank a bit. And that's how big of a figure he was, especially in the 70s and 80s. There was no more profound influence on the game at that time than Bob Knight. And if there were a Mount Rushmore of basketball coaches, not just college coaches, but basketball coaches worldwide, Bob Knight, his face would be on that Mount Rushmore.
No question. Jay Bilas saying, Coach Knight, not for everyone, but he was an American original and a good friend of yours. Jay, we appreciate you coming on and sharing your thoughts this morning. Thanks so much.